Sonic Adventure's Chao Gardens really siphoned my lifespan as a child, and that's because these locations were so stupidly relaxing, cozy, and uplifting to be around. But were they all created equally? That's something we're about to find out, starting with the Dreamcast version of the Station Square Garden. One of the first mentions of its existence comes from the hotel manager. He says that to reach the Chao Garden that you've gotta take the left elevator. What? Upon entering, you'll discover that this garden appears to be on the top floor of the hotel? I'm honestly not sure. At first I thought this circular piece of the ceiling was some kind of glass dome that lets you view the sky, considering there appear to be cloud textures here, but you can also see them on the ceiling of this structure, which makes me consider if this is actually just some paint that was smeared about. Personally, I'm leaning more towards this being a glass dome. Why? Because of all the greenery here. Unless you've got some sophisticated system set up, these plants need natural sunlight to grow. So despite some pretty good evidence claiming that it's a painting of some sort, I'm gonna stubbornly say that the ceiling here is trying to be a glass dome, which is good enough for me. Judging by the floor design, this place feels like it was created as a level in the hotel first and a Chao Garden second, which gives it this interesting vibe that you won't really find in the other gardens we visit. Because on one hand you're walking on concrete, and on the other you're stepping on greenery, bushes, and bonking into trees. What really hits home this vibe is the indoor pool on the far side of the room. Unlike every other Chao Garden we're about to see, this one's water is not natural, and has to be coming from some kind of system from within the hotel, which is honestly kind of wholesome when you think about it. The hotel manager we spoke to earlier apparently loves Chao so much that he repurposed an entire floor for raising them and went the extra mile to make sure they felt at home in their habitat, which I can't help but be charmed by. On the other side of the room, you'll discover the Chao race door, which somehow leads to this enormous outdoor area that's somehow right next to this hotel. Try not to think about it. Considering this garden is within close proximity to Emerald Coast, Casinopolis, Twinkle Park, and Speed Highway, along with being the only garden in this game to contain the Chao racing area, along with being where most character stories begin, it is highly likely to be the garden you spend most of your time in, which isn't a bad thing per se, but I would have liked for the three gardens in this game to feel a little more balanced in terms of where their locations are and what they contain. DX's Station Square Garden is notably brighter than its Dreamcast counterpart, and when you look up at the ceiling, hey, what do you know? You can clearly see the sky. Guess that was the intention after all, huh? This time, the entire ceiling is this glass dome, which I imagine is a lot easier on the greenery when it comes to receiving natural sunlight. The indoor pool got a huge makeover, where the middle of it contains a fountain with a Chao statue that holds some flowers. The Dreamcast version didn't really have anything that showed how its water was moving or how any new water would get there in the first place, whereas here it's pretty clear that this fountain is the source. You've even got some concrete at the back of the fountain for Chao to chill by, which is easily my favorite location here. Runner-up's gotta be right behind the Chao transporter, if only cause whenever I lose my Chao they almost always end up here somehow. This garden's convenient location in relation to other levels and containing the Chao racing area remains the same, but now it grants you access to the black market, yet another thing it has over the other two gardens, further imbalancing the three, which is a little unfortunate. Something I liked more about the Dreamcast variation was the entrance to it, which actually, had you coming out of an elevator, the thing that you enter to get up there in the first place. The DX version here has you start by going through an elevator the same way, just to have you come out of these huge sliding doors, which isn't consistent and feels a little awkward. Overall though, I do prefer the DX version of this garden, as I feel that it fully realized the concepts that the Dreamcast garden was trying to go for. Accessing the Dreamcast Mystic Ruins garden is as simple as venturing through this cave and hopping onto this minecart, which greets you with a pretty secluded location on the side of a mountain. This place is easily one of the most underrated Chao gardens ever. I just don't see it talked about, and I feel it's because of the issue I mentioned earlier. The only levels somewhat close by are Windy Valley and Ice Cap. On top of of that, it doesn't have access to the Chao racing station, and is fairly off the beaten path in the field area, which is a shame because this natural formation feels right at home with the Chao. When you really get down to it, these guys are quite vulnerable to the harshness of nature, something that this game makes all but clear to you when you're thinking of releasing one into the wild. That said, it makes sense that Chao would migrate to a safe place like this. Aside from the protection they gain from its isolation, they can enjoy a steady stream of fresh water from the waterfall, and can fly around at their leisure from the ledges and pillars. Wait a minute, pillars? Those aren't a natural formation, at least not with intricate designs like these. Upon closer inspection, they somewhat resemble the architecture from the Echidna tribe from ages past, which makes a lot of sense considering the story revealed that Mystic Ruins here was their original homeland. Along with that, we also find out that Tikal in particular was loved by Chao. I like to think that at some point Tikal found this secluded location and thought it would be a safe place for the Chao she cared about, thus resulting in Echidna-made pillars that have all but broken apart as time passed. This also explains the wooden gates along the edge of the cliff. Tikal obviously didn't want the Chao to accidentally hurtle themselves into the abyss, so she must have had these barricades built for their safety. An argument against these barricades being built by Echidnas is their black and yellow striped pattern, a common hazard symbol among humans, and their prevalence in the main Mystic Ruins area found around man-made machinery, which could imply that they're all man-made, which wouldn't really surprise me considering the teleportation technology that's present here, or the minecart, which I'm unsure if the Echidnas built or not. When it comes to the pillars though, I like to think that was absolutely built by the Echidnas, and man was it worth doing. This place is awesome. You've got a wooden bridge that leads up to this upper ledge where Chao can just chill. They could even make it to the tops of the pillars if they wanted to, or how about resting on this mini Chao island if they get tired, or taking a break under the shade of this ark. If I was a Chao, then I'd love to hang out in this place. It just looks like a good time waiting to be had. The DX version of this garden has the same entrance and turns up the brightness filter once more, which again I do like, but that's pretty much everything I feel like this version of the garden has over the Dreamcast one. Yeah, I don't really like the changes it made here much. It removed the wooden bridge leading up to the high ledge and replaced it with a simple slope up to the ledge, which isn't nearly as charming, partly because we know the wooden bridge was made by someone, which adds on to the mystique of who did it and the wholesomeness of, aw, someone really cared about these guys. The pillars are now in a less interesting formation than before too. Instead of taking on this cool arc shape like in the Dreamcast garden, the DX one is just content with plopping a pillar on its side and calling it a day. My best guess for why these changes were made was to make it easier for the player to find their Chao, because while the Dreamcast variation has some cool unique designs, I will admit that it can get a little harder to find your Rugrats when they're going about their day. I guess I could understand this perspective, but I still prefer the Dreamcast variation despite this flaw it has, in part because I like how its grass looks more too. I don't know, it just feels like it fits better than the bright green we got in the DX version. Lastly, you'll notice that the gates on the edges no longer have the black and yellow striped pattern, which lends itself to the theory of the Echidna tribe having constructed this a little easier, which I do appreciate. Overall, I'd hand this one to the Dreamcast version for having a more interesting layout that I feel fits with the theme better. And the award for the least likely Chao garden to exist, but does anyways, is Eggman's garden. You heard that right, Dr. Eggman has his own Chao garden. The way you get into it is by first entering the password Eggman here on his ship. Can I just say that I find it really funny that aside from Eggman having created his own Chao garden, that he felt it necessary to guard it under lock and key? Either he's embarrassed about his hobby or he has a huge soft spot for these little guys, and honestly, don't we all? After entering the password, you've got to stand in the teleporter to be warped to this island resort. Dreamcast version, by the way. There's a lot to talk about here, but the first thing that catches my eye is this central building, which you can't access, but I think it's fair to say that this is where Eggman spends a fair amount of his time relaxing while his Chao are outside playing. The massive satellite dish spinning around on top makes me think that he did some of his work remotely from this place, which makes me incredibly jealous. Imagine doing your job remotely from a Chao island of your own creation. That just sounds so cool. On the beach side, we can see a recliner with a parasol, where I now have an image of Eggman sunbathing burned into my mind. Sorry about that. If you run along the beach, you'll find that it eventually stops, leaving you with tons of water for you and your Chao to swim around in. The only walkable parts of the island on this side is this lip here, along with the rocks that stick out above the surface. I actually love this design and feel like it adds a lot of charm to this place. One argument people may have against this deep water though is that you can't grab your Chao while they're swimming in it, which is true, but I don't think this is a knock against the water as much as it's a knock against the developers for not having designed proper swimming controls that let you pick up Chao while on the surface. Maybe characters could have been given a floaty similar to Big so that the job could have been done. But while I really like the idea of deep water surrounding part of the island, I feel like the devs did go a bit overkill with it. I mean, half of the play area by the coast is completely underwater, which doesn't leave too much room for your Chao to move around on dry land. But man, oh man, does this garden want to make it up to me, because it has this really charming path alongside the hilltop that, when followed, eventually leads up to the teleporters and main building. You'll notice that the middle of this pathway is a bit lighter than the rest, which may be due to Eggman's footsteps withering away this section of the grass over time. Recreation aside, we can't ignore the giant missile in the room. What is this thing doing here? Judging from the looks of it, it's most certainly been designed by Eggman, but if that's the case, then does that mean he attempted to blow up this place? With how much care he clearly put into this quaint island, I highly doubt that this missile was his attempt at destroying all of his hard work along with his adorable Chao. So what other explanation could there be? Well, what if Eggman first discovered this island from afar and thought it would serve as a good spot for a sea base? With this logic, he may have decided to try terraforming this place via this missile, and when it ended up not working, he likely visited the place personally, only to discover the Chao that live here, which must have taken hold over his heart as he dedicated himself to making a station here, a teleporter to his egg carrier, and the password to keep this truth under lock and key. Speaking of which, why do you think he has a Chao egg locked here in a jail cell on the egg carrier? Do you wonder if he was trying to keep it safe and close by so he could keep an eye on it as it hatches? I mean, this egg had to have gotten here somewhere, and other than him, the only other possibility I can think of is that one of the E-series robots did it. Strange. I should mention that this garden is next to no levels, with your only options being Sky Deck or Hot Shelter if you're even playing the right characters to enter those places to begin with. That aside, like Mystic Ruins, this place has no access to the Chao racing area, but what it loses in terms of gameplay convenience, I feel it makes up for in aesthetic. You arrive at the DX version of this place the same way you do Dreamcast, and it certainly has made some interesting changes. Half of the coast of this island is no longer underwater. It's been drained of it all and replaced with beachside, providing a lot more land for your Chao to travel about on, as well as those stone structures from before, except now every part of them is exposed. This change gives me mixed feelings, cause honestly I wish there was some kind of middle ground. The Dreamcast version that sinks half this place underwater is a little overkill, whereas DX's version here making the entire place on land feels overkill in its own way. It would have been nice to have, a quarter or so that's underwater. That way you can keep this unique feature of the island while also providing your Chao with plenty of room to move around. It also would have prevented from this version of the garden from being so ridiculously large. It easily has the most square footing out of every other Chao garden in existence, which despite its flat nature can make it a little difficult finding where your buddies are. I'm sure once you know your way around this place then it gets easier, but I really feel like this place could have used just a little bit of shrinking to better match the sizes of every other Chao garden. One change I absolutely don't like is the removal of the pathway that leads up to the main building. Now all there is some slopes that lead up there, which reminds me all too much of a similar change that was made to Mystic Ruins. I don't know what the developers had against pathways here, so what if they make it a little harder to keep track of my children? I demand they stop denying us of these unique set pieces and replacing them with slopes. I won't stand for this. Overall, I honestly can't say I like one version of this garden over the other. The Dreamcast version has the cool pathway and underwater area, whereas the DX version provides more land and fixes the issue with the water being too deep. I'm torn, and with me preferring DX's Station Square and Dreamcast Mystic Ruins, I guess that means all in all, I find their Chao gardens fairly equal in value. My dream setup though would be having the Station Square garden with the elevator entrance, the Dreamcast Mystic Ruins garden with the wooden gates, and a mix of the Dreamcast and DX garden for Eggman's one here, where only a quarter of the place is underwater and the pathway to the main building is preserved. I'd say that my least favorite individual garden of the 6 design-wise is Dreamcast Station Squares, with my most favorite being Dreamcast Mystic Ruins. Thanks for watching, consider becoming a member of this channel, and I'll see you tomorrow for more of the June Zoom. Take care.